Thanks for joining us on 9 News. Plus, big news globally this week: an attempted coup from a far-right group in Germany was uncovered that led to the arrest of at least 23 people. And for a bit more on this, maybe some parallels to what's going on in America, and maybe some links back to the January 6th insurrection, we're now joined by CU Denver Professor Christoph Stefes, who's been with us several times before. But Professor, you're in Germany right now and want to get a little bit of an explanation about kind of what happened here, why this is significant, and also thanks for joining us again.
Okay, hey Chris, thanks for being here again. So yeah, what happened? As you mentioned, about 23. Now it's 25. Citizens of Germany got arrested. They seem to have plotted a coup, storming the Bundestag, killing our chancellor, which is comparable to the president in the United States. Having a list of people they wanted to abduct or kill. They found lots of weapons, not heavy weapons, but still semi and even some automatic weapons and ammunition in about 50 locations across Germany. So this is pretty significant, and it's expected that more people will get arrested. There's a second wave always of arrest after they have discovered all the cell phones and the messages and so on and so forth. So there will be more people likely arrested, and most of these 25 are currently in pre-trial detention.
So who is behind this? You mentioned it's a far-right group. Tell us a bit more about that and the background and maybe some of their policy goals and initiatives.
Well, it's a little bit weird. They call themselves the Reichsbürger, which is the citizens of the Reich, of the German Reich. So the Kaiser and from the 19th century, and they claim that the current German state is not legitimate, that its constitutional order should be rejected, that the German Reich is actually still in existence, and hence they refuse to accept any of the German laws. They don't pay penalties. They don't accept that they have to get permits for driver permits. They have they build a shadow state and so on and so forth. So it's about 21,000 people in Germany that belong to this movement. It's very loosely organized. It's actually there's a lot of infighting too. But what makes them so dangerous is they have really good connections to some of the special forces within the German military and the German police. 10% are willing to use violence, and they are usually well armed and trained. But we have a lot, it is interesting, there are so many different people involved in this, from the carpenter to an opera singer, from the blue-blooded prince, who in this case was the ringleader probably of the attempted coup, to police officers, to a judge who was also arrested in this current raid on this group. So there are a lot of people. Usually they are men, so it's like 3-to-1, 3 men to 1 woman. That's the ratio. They're over 40, so the average age is over 50. And they're all believing in this right-wing extremist conspiracy theory.
I got a lot of questions based off of this. It sounds to me, based off of what you said, that this was a fairly sophisticatedly planned plot. That's got to be a little disturbing, I suppose, for the average German citizen. What's been the reaction in Germany based off of this?
It's very different, actually. It is politicized, the reaction. For instance, the biggest opposition party in Germany is the CDU-CSU. Chancellor Merkel, former Chancellor Merkel, was the head of this CDU party. They have not made any official statements, which is interesting because the government parties have made a lot of condemning statements. So the Greens, the Social Democrats, and the FDP, the Free Democratic Party. But I think the Reichsbürger for a long time were completely, they were a laughingstock. They were like these old people, believing in the old German Reich, and nobody thought that they would ever pose a threat to the German constitutional order. And that changed already in 2016 when a police special unit tried to raid a house, and the guy shot actually at the police, killed one police officer. 2 years ago, there was an attempted, like January 6th in the United States. So 2 years ago, we had that in Germany. It failed, it was not even close, not like January 6th in the United States where they actually entered Congress. But in this case, they actually already didn't make it to the door. But nevertheless, the Reichsbürger were leading the charge, so to say. And so people are taking this more and more serious, even if they have not the capacity to topple the German government, of course. The potential for terrorist attacks are quite high, or is quite high, yeah.
So I kind of want to liken this a little bit to America, so hopefully our audience can understand this a little bit better. You've mentioned a few January 6th similarities here. How would you compare what happened this week to the insurrection that did take place back on January 6th of 2021? Although I know you did explain some of that just now. If you could get into a bit more detail about that.
Sure. I mean, January 6th was much bigger when you think about it, right? I mean, we had hundreds and hundreds of people successfully storming the capital. That has not happened in Germany. But I see a lot of parallels in ideology, the rejection, for instance, of the state, the rejection of the so-called elite, also the politicization, right? There are large, I say, groups within the GOP, within the Republican Party, that is actually sympathizing with QAnon. And we have the same in the German Bundestag. There's a party called the AfD, that's the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland. They, in the last elections, had about 10% of the votes and thereby garnered 83 seats in Germany's lower house. And they seem to be connected. At least one member, former member of parliament from this party, was arrested this week. So the links are pretty clear. So we see parallels in terms of ideology. We see parallels in terms of this kind of loose organization. There are little cells that are often not very well connected to each other. We see links to established political parties. And what we also see is that these groups are actually connected to each other. So we see transatlantic links between the far-right extremist groups in Germany and the United States, and not just in Germany. I mean, far-right extremist groups are all over Europe, and these are well connected to each other within Europe and to far-right extremist groups in the United States.
Question based off of that. Is Germany as intensely partisan as America is? And any American out there, right, left, center, knows how divided we are here in America. Obviously, I think all of us wish it was different. But is Germany in that way where anything, you say one thing and it seems like the other side's going to say the other? Is that the case in Germany, or is it a little more united?
Yeah. I mean, united, I wouldn't call the political spectrum united, definitely not. I think the polarization in the United States is also relatively new when you think about it, right? I mean, maybe going back to the 1990s. So for the last 3 years in the United States, we have seen this growing polarization. But we also see that to some degree in Germany. And there were certain trigger events that led to this kind of polarization in Germany. The 2015 refugee crisis was one big moment when Germany took about 1 million refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and a few other places. So that was a big moment where the far right suddenly gained a lot of votes, a lot of sympathy, support from the general population. Then the Euro crisis before that, and then most recently, of course, COVID, the COVID pandemic, and this movement against the measures to be taken to contain the pandemic and against vaccination. And there have been a lot of demonstrations, some of them violent, in Berlin and other cities around Germany. And the Reichsbürger, this group, has always been like very central to these kind of movements.
Is this dynamic, as far as you know, a Germany only thing in Europe, or is this something, you mentioned that there's some connections to other parts of the world, certainly here in America. Is this taking place in France, the UK, as well, as far as you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the polarization and especially the rise of the far right of right-wing populism in Germany in Europe is definitely noticeable. In France, definitely in Italy, even in the Scandinavian countries, which for a long time were considered to be like the social democratic strongholds of Europe. Even there, you see right-wing extremist parties rising, actually, sometimes even now in coalition governments. So yeah, it's growing. It's definitely growing.
May I ask me a bit of an uncomfortable question, but I think it's one that does need to be asked. In Germany specifically, knowing the history, is there a bit of an extra sensitivity or nerve to the rise of far right extremism?
I would think so. I would hope so. Let's put it this way. As a political science, we have to be neutral, of course, but in this case, I cannot be neutral. As a German, of course, we should be concerned about this. But that might also be one of the reasons that our far right extremist party, the Alternative for Germany, only gets about 10%, right? So, whereas, for instance, in France, Front National or the former Front National got easily 25% or 30% at parliamentary elections. So there is concern, and that has led people to be more ready to reject these far right groups and parties.
Where do you think Germany goes from here? What do you think happens in the coming weeks, months, based off of this attempted coup?
It's kind of difficult to say. Germany has, I think the political system in Germany is a little bit under fire, is a little bit too much, but it is definitely a moment where we are dealing with a lot of stuff, so to say, right? So we have the Ukraine war, another wave of refugees coming from Ukraine, about 1 million. We expect even more as the winter drives the Ukrainians out of their cold homes, often to Germany. So 1 million are already here. We are dealing with energy shortages. I mean, they're not severe, but the energy prices are rising. People are concerned. We are dealing with climate activism, where people are starting to block airports, starting to block highways in Germany. They glue themselves to the takeoff the runways at the airport recently in Munich, and to several of our German Autobahn, the runways, the highways, sorry. And then now we have this. So I wonder if the politicians can kind of calm things down, normalize it. I'm pretty hopeful. Our chancellor is actually kind of more of a calm guy, so that might happen. But what I definitely expect that the security agencies in Germany are now much more alert and try to infiltrate these right-wing extremist groups significantly more than they have in the past. There have always been critique in Germany that we are focusing too much on left-wing extremism and ignore the right-wing extremism. And I think that is partially true. I hope that will change.
Very interesting. Professor, I must say that I think one of the takeaways I've taken from our conversation here, the amount of links between Germany and America, and how what you're saying seems to be, to varying degrees, replicated in a lot of democracies across the globe right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm teaching a class right now at CU Denver on democracy and democracy in crisis. And I really believe that democracies around the world are in a crisis right now. And that has mainly to do with the rise of right-wing extremist groups across the globe, really. I mean, not just the United States, but also look at India, for instance. The governing party in India is a right-wing populist party. So we see that democracy is struggling right now, at least.
I guess I want to end on a bit more of an optimistic note. As a professor, using your expertise, what do you think is the solution, if any, to the current crisis to democracy?
I think a lot of grassroots movements, right? I believe that we have to become much more involved in politics and involved in a way. Ezra Klein recently in the New York Times did a really beautiful op-ed in which he said, like people say they are so politically engaged, but what they really do is they consume political news and then get, outraged about certain things, or like cheer for one candidate and not the other. But what we really need to do is become more engaged in even local politics, right? Make sure that our voices are heard, make sure that we maybe even run for offices, and that politics becomes more part of our daily life instead of like the consumerist attitude towards politics that we currently have.
Fascinating as always, Professor. I'm always intrigued by our conversations, what you have to say, but obviously not the greatest topic, but certainly, I suppose, somewhat grateful that this attempted coup, was struck down before. It could have been much worse. But see you, Denver Professor Christoph Stefes. As always, thank you so much for your time and joining us here on 9 News Plus today.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.